This is Deadly Truths with Becca. America likes to pretend the frontier was about freedom, wide open land, rugged men, and justice handled face to face. That is the lie. The frontier was not about freedom. It was about power without accountability, violence with a marketing department, and a system that decided who mattered and who could be erased. Outlaws were not born, they were produced, used, romanticized, and disposed of when the story needed a clean ending. This series is not about heroes. It's about what really happens when law fails, myths take over, and violence becomes entertainment. Today, we're cutting through the legend because the frontier is not fading. It's been dead for a long time. And this is where we prove it. Before Billy the Kid was famous, he was cornered. There was a grown man named Frank. He was bigger, older, drunk, and known for pushing people around. He had been tormenting Billy for weeks. This time he did not stop. He grabbed Billy, slammed him, pinned him, and laughed while he was doing it. There was no crowd rushing in, no law stepping up. Just a teenager on the floor realizing no one was coming. Billy pulled the gun and fired once. Frank staggered away and died the next day. Billy ran, not because he was proud, but because he understood something early. The system wouldn't see context, only a body. That shot did not make him a legend. It made him marked. And from that moment on, every future act of violence would be treated not as an incident, but as proof that the story about him had already been decided. When you fast forward a couple of years, no one will see Billy the Kid die in a blaze of glory. They heard a voice in the dark. A small room, no moonlight, the smell of dust and sweat. Someone asked, "Who's there?" in Spanish. The answer was a gunshot. No warning, no standoff, no last words worth printing. Just a body on the floor and a story that would immediately start lying about how it happened. That's how legends are born, not in daylight, but in silence, when the person who could contradict the story is already dead. America loves a pretty criminal, especially when he's young, smiling, and dead before he can talk back. They called him a killer. They sold him as a legend. But Billy the Kid was not a monster. He was a useful one. And when he stopped being useful, they put a bullet in him and called it justice. Billy the Kid was not born as a legend, of course. He was born into instability. Henry McCarty came into this world in the late 1850s on the wrong side of money, health, and luck. His father disappeared from the record early, which in frontier terms usually means death, abandonment, or something no one bothered to document because poor people weren't worth documenting. His mother, Catherine, dragged him and his brother from city to city chasing cleaner air for her tuberculosis, bouncing between New York, Indiana, Kansas, and finally the Southwest. This was not an adventure. It was medical desperation. By the time Billy was a teenager, his mother was dead. His stepfather was gone, and there was no safety net. No extended family, no church rescue, no state system. You didn't get counseling. You didn't get foster care. You got the street. After that, Billy didn't run wild. He drifted, which is what kids without anchors do. He worked odd jobs, slept where he could, learned fast, and learned young. That charm mattered more than strength. He was small, quick-witted, polite when it served him, and invisible when it didn't. The frontier liked to pretend it rewarded grit. But in reality, it rewarded whoever already had power. Billy did not have power, so he adapted. Theft came before violence. Survival came before ideology. He wasn't chasing fame or rebellion. He was trying not to disappear in a world that ate boys like him for fuel. This is the part of the myth that everyone will leave out on purpose. Billy did not fall from grace. There was no grace to fall from. He entered adulthood already expendable, already outside protection, already learning that rules only applied downward. By the time violence found him, it did not feel like a choice. It felt like gravity. And once you understand that, the story stops being romantic and starts being really unsettling. Because Billy the Kid wasn't an outlaw origin story. He was what happens when a society shrugs at an orphaned child and then acts shocked when they don't turn out like a saint. What made Billy the Kid unusual wasn't how dangerous he was. It was how undirected he was. He didn't come up through a criminal family. He did not inherit a crew and didn't build an empire. There was no long game, no territory, no code. He attached himself to whoever offered food, work, or protection at that moment. That's not a mastermind. That's a kid navigating power on the fly. The legend later pretended he was a born outlaw with destiny in his blood. In reality, he was improvising in a system that never offered him any permanence. Multiple contemporaries noted that Billy could read and write, which already set him apart in a frontier culture liked to imagine itself rugged, but was often functionally illiterate. He was remembered as being polite, which I had mentioned, soft-spoken, and socially agile, the kind of person who knew how to lower his voice instead of raising it. He spoke fluent Spanish, enough to move with ease among Mexican and Hispanic communities, which made him useful and suspect at the same time. That is a detail that gets erased in myth because it complicates the clean Anglo outlaw narrative. Billy wasn't culturally singular. He moved between worlds, which made him harder to pin down and easier to scapegoat. When violence entered his life, it didn't look like ambition, it looked like escalation. His first killing happened young and under pressure, inside disputes where lines were already drawn and guns were already out. He did not hunt civilians. He didn't terrorize towns for sport. Violence was not a profession. It was a tool he reached for after other options disappeared. The frontier later rebranded that as bloodlust because it sells better. But if you strip away the legend, what is left is a teenager who learned too early that survival sometimes required crossing lines he never planned to live behind. Billy did not choose the frontier chaos. He was raised inside of it. By the time Billy the Kid came of age, New Mexico was not some wild, empty vacuum waiting for order to arrive. It was already owned. Power had names, addresses, and business interests. Ranching, monopolies, merchant housing, and political fixers ran the territory like a company town, deciding who got contracts, credit, and protection. The law existed, but it didn't belong to the public. Judges and deputies were aligned with whichever faction paid better or threatened harder. Calling that lawless is inconvenient. It lets the people in charge pretend they weren't in charge at all. From a distance, the violence looked chaotic. From inside it, the lines were clear. If you were connected, you were protected. If you were not, you were fair game. Legal systems weren't absent. They were selectively enforced. Arrests, warrants, and killings all flowed downhill. This is the part frontier mythology always avoids because it ruins the fantasy of rugged individualism. What actually existed was early stage corporate capture. with guns instead of paperwork. When disputes broke out, they weren't about justice or honor. They were about who controlled resources and who could be erased without consequences. Seen through modern lenses, this is not unfamiliar at all. We recognize this structure now. Privatized power wearing a public badge, violence justified as restoring order, and blame assigned to the most expendable people involved. New Mexico didn't lack law, it lacked accountability. And once you see that, the story stops being about a few bad men and starts looking like a system doing exactly what it was designed to do, just without the PR team to clean it up. The fight that swallowed Billy the Kid was not random gunplay. It was a territorial struggle between people who already had money and people who wanted more of it. On one side were entrenched commercial interests, store owners who controlled credit, suppliers who decided who ate and who starved, and political figures who turned those economic chokeholds into policy. On the other were ranchers and newer operators trying to break that grip, backed by officials who resented how thoroughly the local economy had been monopolized. It was a balance of power dispute dressed up as frontier justice, and everyone involved understood the stakes, even if they pretended otherwise. Billy did not choose this conflict because of loyalty to a cause or belief in reform. He chose proximity. He worked for men who offered him pay, shelter, and a role. And once violence escalated, neutrality stopped being an option. Aligning with the wrong employers in a captured system is never just a career mistake, it's a death sentence. The side Billy fell in with lacked institutional muscle. They didn't control the courts, they didn't control the narrative, and once the shooting ended, they couldn't protect the people who had fought for them. That's where this story turns. History remembers winners as stabilizers and losers as criminals, regardless of who fired first or why. Everyone that was associated with the opposition became disposable, and Billy most of all. He was young, visible, and lacked backing once the dust settled. From that point on, he wasn't a participant in a conflict anymore. He was evidence that needed to be erased so the outcome could be framed as order restored rather than power secured. What played out in New Mexico gets mislabeled as gunfighter chaos, but the violence followed money with almost embarrassing consistency. Killings clustered around contracts, land access, supply routes, and control of enforcement. When someone got shot, it usually traced back to who owed whom, who cut someone out of a deal, or who suddenly found their protection revoked. This was not rage spilling over. It was leverage applied with bullets. The frontier didn't invent this playbook. It just skipped the paperwork. Violence functioned as enforcement when courts were already spoken for. That's why Billy the Kid does not fit the rebel narrative people want to project onto him. He was not trying to topple the system or live outside of it. He was operating inside it, doing what young, expendable men have always been hired to do when powerful people don't want their hands dirty. He guarded property, backed claims, intimidated rivals, and showed up when muscle was needed. That is not revolution. That's contract work, just without a pension or plausible deniability. Then there is the fact that Billy's violence served existing hierarchies, not some romantic outlaw code. He was not pushing back against society. He was acting on behalf of people who already had influence but needed someone replaceable to take that risk. When those interests shifted and collapsed, Billy didn't suddenly become dangerous, he just became inconvenient. And once that happened, the same system that had relied on him recast him as a menace, because history is always cleaner when the blame lands on the person with the least power to argue back. Then there's also the lie that made him famous. There is a number, and it didn't come from evidence, it came from marketing. 21 kills was a headline, not a body count, and it stuck because it was tidy, shocking, and easy to remember. 1 year, 1 life. The kind of symmetry editors love because it turns a messy human story into a clean moral fable. He was 21. He had 21 kills. No audits, no court records, no forensic verification, just repetition until the number felt true. Frontier journalism was not reporting history, it was building a brand, and Billy the Kid was its breakout product. When you slow the story down and actually track names, dates, and circumstances, the picture collapses fast. Some deaths attributed to Billy happened when he was not even present. Others came from group fights where responsibility was blurred on purpose. A few incidents were inflated through retelling, each version adding another notch to the belt. The confirmed killings land in a much smaller range, and most occurred during armed clashes where multiple sides were already shooting. That doesn't make them harmless, but it does strip away the image of a lone predator stalking the innocent. What matters isn't just the number being wrong, it's why the lie survived. Inflated kill counts made Billy easier to sell as pure menace, which conveniently erased the role of organized power in the bloodshed. It shifted focus from systematic conflict to individual pathology. That is a classic move. Blame the visible kid with the gun instead of the invisible men who set the table. From a modern perspective, the pattern is obvious. Exaggerate the violence of the least protected person involved, and the system gets to walk away without looking like the adult in the room. Once Billy the Kid crossed from local nuance to national curiosity, accuracy stopped mattering. Stories didn't need witnesses, they needed momentum. A death in the territory became his death by default. If a gunfight happened nearby, his name did get attached. If a man disappeared, Billy became a convenient explanation. This was not sloppy reporting, it was deliberate simplification. Assigning every violent outcome to one recognizable figure made the frontier feel legible to readers thousands of miles away who had no interest in nuance. The process fed on itself, each retelling hardened rumor into record, and by the time anyone bothered to question the details, the myth had already outrun the facts. Editors preferred certainty over correction. A dangerous outlaw with an endless body count was easier to print than a tangled web of territorial politics and shared culpability. Complexity doesn't travel well. Villains do. So the exaggerations stayed, the fabrications were multiplied, and the contradictions were quietly ignored. What this reveals about America is pretty disgusting. The country didn't want to understand why violence happened. It wanted a symbol to absorb it, turning Billy into a singular embodiment of frontier brutality let everyone else off the hook. Systems don't make good stories. Individuals do. And once the story locked in, accuracy became a threat because the truth wasn't entertaining enough to justify the blood that had already been spilled. The frontier press wasn't documenting events, it was manufacturing emotion. Papers competed for attention in a crowded, impatient market, and nothing moved copies faster than danger with a face. Billy the Kid, he's young. He was technically good looking, I suppose, for that time frame, or at least people thought he was, and already tangled in violence, which made him perfect. Editors didn't need restraint. Each article sharpened his image, stripping away context, until all that remained was a headline-friendly menace. The goal was not to inform the readers, it was to keep them scared enough to buy tomorrow's paper. You can see this happening today. The difference is we don't buy papers anymore. By repeating his name alongside every act of disorder, the media turned Billy into shorthand for instability itself. He stopped being a person and became a symbol, the embodiment of everything Eastern audiences feared about the West. This wasn't accidental. Symbols are profitable because they compress complex realities into something emotionally manageable. A teenager with a revolver is easier to process than corrupt institutions or economic warfare. So the press leaned in, knowing exactly what it was doing. Billy's notoriety wasn't self-made. It's not like this kid did any tours or promotions. He definitely did not posture for fame. His image was built by people who never met him and did not care about him. Newspapers monetized his existence while insulating themselves from responsibility for the consequences. Fear drove circulation. Again, something that the media still does. Myth extended shelf life. And when the story finally ended in blood, the same outlets that inflated his reputation sold the endings as closure, proof that the monster they created was real all along. By the time Pat Garrett entered the story, the mess is already inconvenient for people who want stability on paper. Garrett wasn't a legendary lawman riding from nowhere. He was a guy trying to secure his position in a territory where reputations were currency. He needed proof that he could deliver results and fast. Rest would not do. Trials dragged on, acquittals embarrassed everyone involved. What the power structure wanted was finality. Garrett understood that solving the Billy the Kid problem would do more for his standing than years of routine enforcement ever could. What actually happened at Fort Sumner is far less movie-like than later retellings. Billy the Kid was not facing down a posse at high noon. He was caught in a dark room, confused, likely unarmed, or at least not actively threatening anyone in that moment. Garrett fired first and never gave the chance for Billy to even surrender. Historians are clear on this much. Whatever else Garrett claimed afterwards, this wasn't a fair confrontation. The later attempts to frame it as necessary or inevitable were retroactive justifications, not facts established at the time. The mythology that followed tried to turn Garrett into the man who restored order, but that's not how history actually reads. Violence did not stop, corruption did not recede. The only thing that changed was that one highly visible problem disappeared. From a modern perspective, the move is obvious. Eliminate the person who attracts attention and liability and call it peace. Garrett did not dismantle the system that produced Billy. He removed the most inconvenient reminder of it, and that's why, stripped of the legend, his heroism looks less like justice and more like administrative cleanup with a gun. Killing Billy solved a short-term optic problem and created a permanent one. The moment he died, the story froze. No aging, no contradictions, no chance for him to unravel the legend himself. Death locked his image in place, and it was handed over to writers, filmmakers, and promoters who could shape it into whatever they wanted to. That's how notoriety turns into permanence. Billy stopped being a problem and started being an intellectual property, endlessly reusable and impossible to correct. Meanwhile, Pat Garrett's moment did not last. Outside of the killing itself, there wasn't much to build a legacy on. His career did stall, his authority eroded, and his name only resurfaces when it is attached to Billy's. History has a way of downgrading people who solve problems without changing conditions. Once the excitement faded, Garrett became incidental. proof that eliminating a person doesn't automatically grant relevance or respect. What didn't change at all were the forces that made the conflict profitable in the first place. Power stayed concentrated, enforcement stayed selective, new men stepped into the same roles Billy once filled, doing the same dangerous work under different names. From a long view, the lesson is blunt. Removing a single figure never fixes a system designed to produce replacements. You can erase faces, rewrite headlines, and call it closure, but the structure survives, and it keeps recruiting until somebody finally challenges the machinery instead of feeding it another body. So strip away the legend and what's left doesn't fit any of the boxes America prefers. Billy the Kid doesn't hold up as a savior. He doesn't scan as a deranged killer either. He wasn't driven by ideology or compulsion. He was young and operating inside an economy where survival depended on serving people with more leverage than conscience. That combination does not produce heroes or monsters. It produces casualties who look dangerous only because they are visible. The country did not elevate Billy while he was alive. It hunted him, exaggerated him, and closed ranks against him. His value exploded only once he could no longer contradict the version of events being sold. Death made him safe. Silent figures can't complicate narratives, can't expose who benefited, can't point upwards. They are ideal vessels for myth because they don't argue back. Billy the Kid did not talk like a dime novel villain. His words were plain, defensive, and revealing of how he saw the world closing in on him. One of the most quoted lines attributed to him came late in his life, when he was already being hunted. I don't blame you for shooting me, but I blame you for lying about it afterward. Whether every word is exact or slightly polished by memory, the sentiment tracks. Billy understood that killing him wasn't the worst part. Rewriting the story was. He seemed more offended by the dishonesty than the violence, which says a lot about how clearly he saw the myth machine at work. Another line attributed to Billy cuts through the romantic outlaw nonsense entirely. I never killed anyone who didn't deserve it. If we take that literally, it's a troubling statement. Taken in context, it's a window into frontier logic, a world where survival, retaliation, and loyalty replace courts and due process. He was not claiming moral purity. He was stating the rules as he understood them. Rules handed down by adults who benefited from violence but wouldn't own it themselves. What's striking is how often Billy's recorded words center on betrayal rather than bravado. After being captured and sentenced, he reportedly said, "I've been hunted all my life." No boasting, no legend building, just a statement of fact that someone who never expected protection to arrive. That line resonates because it strips the story down to its bones. A young man who knew early that he was always going to be the one chased and not the one shielded. There's also a quieter quote that is attributed to him during his time on the run. I know they'll get me in the end. Whether spoken exactly that way or paraphrased, historians agree the outlook fits. Billy didn't behave like someone who believed in a long future. His choices reflect a short horizon, the mindset of someone operating under borrowed time. That's not the psychology of a folk hero, it's the psychology of a teenager who understands he's already been written off. Taken together, Billy's words don't read like a legend at all. They read like someone painfully aware that history was being decided around him, without him, and that once he was gone, the story would belong to people with better printing presses and cleaner hands. And at this point, you may be asking what I've been asking. Why is Billy the Kid one of America's favorite fantasy outlaws? Well, here is a clear-eyed breakdown. Billy the Kid became famous because Americans didn't actually want the truth about the frontier. They just wanted a symbol. He was young, or back then, women found him attractive and violent in a way that could be simplified. He was not a kingpin or a general. He was accessible, and that made him usable. You could turn him into whatever the audience needs: a villain, a rebel, a warning, or a tragic boy lost in chaos. Complexity would have killed the story. Billy's life was messy enough to justify violence, but simple enough to package. Timing mattered too. Billy hit the national imagination right when the frontier was closing and the country was trying to rewrite its own past. Industrial America needed the West to look wild so the present could look civilized by comparison. Turning one teenager into the embodiment of frontier danger helped sell that transition. Kill the outlaw, tame the land, declare progress. Billy became the before and after photo. That's also the American obsession with youth and premature death. Billy didn't live long enough to disappoint anyone. No middle age, no slow moral decay, no boring later chapters. He died at 21, which froze him in permanent myth form. Dead young men don't contradict the legend. They don't age into nuance, they stay marketable. And finally, Americans are drawn to stories where violence feels justified, but responsibility stays vague. Billy absorbed blame that properly belonged to institutions, economic interest, and political corruption. Making him famous let the system off the hook. You can't indict a structure as easily as you can narrate a gunfight. So Billy's fame isn't really about who he was, it's about what Americans needed him to be. And admittedly, I fell for this as a kid. I was absolutely obsessed with Billy the Kid. He was dangerous, and it sounded romantic, I suppose, in some strange, sick sense. And it was a story that lets everyone kind of feel absolved, and that's why it sticks. There is a lot of talk, though, about how fast Billy the Kid was, and that this also contributes to the legend. It's important to understand, though, Billy the Kid was not famous because he could outdraw anyone in some stopwatch fantasy. That is Hollywood math. What he was known for, according to people who actually encountered him, was speed under pressure, reacting quickly, moving quickly, and firing without hesitation when a situation turned bad. Historians who sift through eyewitness accounts agree on a few things that matter more than raw draw speed. Billy carried his gun in a practical position, not in a showy position. He didn't wait for ritualized standoffs. When violence happened, it happened suddenly, often at close range, and Billy acted first. That kind of fast isn't about reflex competitions. It's about reading danger early and committing before the other person finishes thinking. There's also the age and size factor. Billy was young, lean, and constantly on alert. He was not weighed down by bravado or expectation. Older men around him expected rules, warnings, words, escalation. Billy didn't. In real-world violence, the person who breaks the script is the one who usually wins. Most frontier killings weren't duels, they were ambushes, sudden clashes, or chaotic shootouts. Billy survived longer than most, not because he was magical, but because he did not hesitate, did not posture, and didn't assume protection would arrive. So yes, he was fast, just not movie fast. He was real life fast. That's the real frontier legacy, not freedom or lawlessness, but the ability to turn exploitation into folklore. The system takes what it needs, discards the person, and then repackages the damage as entertainment. Calling it myth keeps it distant, calling it history keeps it clean. But the pattern is old, repeatable, and still recognizable, which is why the frontier isn't something we lost. It's something we outgrew and buried without ever fixing what made it lethal in the first place. Billy the Kid did not break the frontier, he revealed it. A system that needed violence rewarded loyalty to power and erased the people it used up. When he was alive, he was a problem. When he was dead, he was profitable. That's not an accident. That's a pattern. The frontier didn't end because it got civilized. It ended because the myth outlived the truth, and the truth was harder to sell. You've been listening to The Frontier is Dead under Deadly Truths with Becca. If this episode made you rethink things, good. That's where real history starts, because legends don't tell you who had power, they tell you who paid the price. That's the frontier myth, and that's why the frontier is dead. Follow, rate, and share wherever you're listening. Take care.